Clean your desk and get out of my tower." The CEO's son sneered, throwing my termination papers. I nodded, picked up my briefcase, and headed to the courthouse. He thought he was firing a manager. He didn't know he had just locked his own $45 million transaction. As the board members sat in stunned silence, watching the papers slide off the polished mahogany table, I kept my face entirely expressionless. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene. I simply gathered my personal laptop, slipped my leather-bound notebook into my bag, and walked out. They thought it was a simple restructuring. They believed that by eliminating my position, they were clearing the runway for the largest financial windfall in the history of the company. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson about reading the fine print. The story actually began 15 years ago, back in the spring of 2011. I was 33 years old, hungry, and possessed a borderline obsessive eye for detail. I had spent a decade working in the grueling trenches of commercial property management in Chicago before moving back to our mid-sized city. That was when Lawrence Shaw, the self-made founder and chief executive officer of Shaw Properties Incorporated, hired me to oversee his pride and joy, the Shaw Tower. At the time, the building was a 22-story concrete and glass monolith sitting in the heart of the downtown financial district. When I took over, the tower was struggling. The national economy was still recovering, and our local vacancy rate sat at a painful 40%. Lawrence was a brilliant developer, but he was old school. He managed his properties by gut feeling and handshakes, which meant the building's operational records were an absolute mess. Tenant ledgers were incomplete, maintenance schedules were reactive rather than preventive, and utility costs were skyrocketing due to an outdated pneumatic heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. I immediately went to work, implementing a rigorous system of preventative maintenance and lease audits. I spent my first 6 months in the basement archive room, reading through every single active lease agreement page by page. I digitized the records, built an automated tracking system for lease expirations, and renegotiated our vendor contracts for elevator maintenance and janitorial services. I saved the company over $300,000 in operating expenses during my first year alone, Lawrence noticed. He gave me complete operational autonomy and treated me like a partner. By 2014, the building's occupancy had risen to 85%. I had grown to love the tower. I knew every electrical conduit, every structural pillar, and every tenant's quirks. I also saw an opportunity to launch my own business. I had established a small real estate investment vehicle called Vance Holdings LLC. I wanted to establish a permanent office space for my company, and the top-floor penthouses of the Shaw Tower, Penthouse A and Penthouse B, had been vacant for 3 years due to their high rental price. I approached Lawrence with a proposal. My company, Vance Holdings LLC, would sign a 15-year commercial lease for both penthouse suites. I offered to pay $18,500 per month under a triple net structure, meaning my LLC would cover its proportional share of property taxes, building insurance, and common area maintenance. Since the market was still soft and the suites required a significant tenant improvement build-out, Lawrence was thrilled to secure a long-term tenant for the unoccupied space. However, because I was investing over $200,000 of my own capital into the high-end build-out of the penthouse suites, my real estate attorney insisted on strict protections. We drafted a comprehensive lease rider containing several standard commercial clauses. The most crucial of these was Section 24, subsection D, the right of first refusal. This clause stated that if Shaw Properties Incorporated ever received a bona fide written offer from a third party to purchase the Shaw Tower, the landlord was contractually obligated to deliver a complete copy of that offer to Vance Holdings LLC within 24 hours. My LLC would then have exactly 30 business days to match the purchase price and terms. If the landlord failed to provide this notice or sold the building to a third party without obtaining a written waiver of the right of first refusal from Vance Holdings LLC, the landlord would be in material breach of the lease. The clause also specified that any sale executed in violation of this right would be legally voidable, and the landlord would owe a contractual penalty equal to 25% of the total transaction value. Lawrence read the rider, shrugged, and signed it. To him, the Shaw Tower was his legacy. He had no intention of ever selling it. The lease was officially executed on October 1, 2014, and recorded with the County Registrar of Deeds. For the next 12 years, Vance Holdings LLC paid its rent on time every single month, and I continued to manage the entire building with absolute dedication. Under my watch, the Shaw Tower became the premier business address in the city, reaching 98% occupancy and generating a net operating income of over $3 million annually. But by 2026, things changed. Lawrence's health began to decline rapidly. At 62, his heart was failing and he stepped back from daily operations. His 32-year-old son, Bradley Shaw, was appointed as the vice president of property operations. Bradley had an expensive MBA, zero practical experience in property management, and a massive chip on his shoulder. He did not care about legacy, and he did not care about the people who had built the company. Bradley only cared about quick money, and he had his eyes set on a $45 million cash out. Bradley Shaw arrived at the office in January of 2026, wearing tailored designer suits and surrounded by a team of expensive management consultants. He immediately began questioning my decisions, looking for ways to cut corners. He suggested firing our long-term unionized janitorial crew to hire an off-brand, uninsured contractor. He proposed delaying the mandatory 5-year safety inspection for our 4 high-speed Otis traction elevators to save $20,000. Every time he brought up these reckless ideas, I flatly refused, pointing out the legal and physical liabilities. Bradley grew to detest me. He saw my expertise as a threat to his authority and my insistence on safety and compliance as an obstacle to his financial goals. What I did not know at the time was that Bradley had already begun secret negotiations to sell the Shaw Tower. He had connected with Crestwood Global Acquisitions, a massive international private equity firm represented by their senior acquisition director, Adrian Thorne. Adrian was 45 years old, ruthless, and known for buying up distressed or undervalued mid-market office buildings, cosmeticizing them, and flipping them to institutional buyers. Bradley had negotiated a purchase price of $45 million. For Bradley, this sale was his ticket to corporate stardom and a massive 2% transaction bonus, which would net him $900,000. However, Crestwood Global Acquisitions had strict conditions for the sale. Their purchase agreement contained a clause stating that the property must be delivered free of any leasehold encumbrances that could interfere with their planned redevelopment. Crestwood planned to spend $10 million converting the top 4 floors of the Shaw Tower into their new regional headquarters. Specifically, they required the penthouse suites, Penthouse A and Penthouse B, to be delivered completely vacant at closing. This was where Bradley hit a brick wall. He had his team audit the building's leases, only to discover that Vance Holdings LLC held a valid recorded commercial lease for the penthouses, with 3 full years remaining. The lease did not contain a landlord relocation or termination convenience clause. Bradley could not simply evict Vance Holdings. Legally, the lease ran with the land, meaning even if the building was sold, the new owner would have to honor the lease terms until October 2029. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon in early March, Bradley summoned me to the executive suite on the 20th floor. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his father's old glass desk, looking smug. He had a stack of documents prepared in front of him. "Julian, sit down," Bradley said, gesturing to a chair. "I'm restructuring the operational assets of Shaw Properties. As part of this transition, we need to clean up some of our outstanding liabilities. I have a lease termination agreement here for your company's space on the 22nd floor. We'll need Vance Holdings to vacate the penthouses by the end of next month. In exchange, the company is willing to offer you a $20,000 relocation assistance payment." I looked at the document on the desk, then looked Bradley dead in the eye. "Bradley, Vance Holdings LLC has a valid lease until 2029. We spent over $200,000 custom building that space for our offices. A $20,000 relocation fee wouldn't even cover the cost of moving our server racks and specialized cabling, let alone the business disruption. I am not signing this." Bradley's smile vanished. You don't have a choice, Julian. This is a corporate directive. If you refuse to cooperate, you're actively hindering the company's progress. I also need you to sign off on this engineering estoppel certificate for the building's structural integrity and elevator systems. We have a prospective buyer, and they need our certified manager's signature to verify there are no outstanding capital expenditure issues. I pulled the estoppel certificate toward me and scanned it. It was a blatant misrepresentation. It stated that all building systems were in peak operating condition and that there were no known structural defects. I knew for a fact that the elevator hoistways required $35,000 in cable replacements, and the roof had a minor membrane leak that would cost $50,000 to patch. I cannot sign this estoppel certificate, I said calmly. It's fraudulent. The elevator cables need replacement, and the roof membrane is compromised. If I sign this, I am personally certifying a false statement to a lender and a buyer. That is fraud. Bradley slammed his fist on the desk. It's not fraud, it's business. You work for me, Julian. You sign what I tell you to sign. If you want to keep your job as the property manager, you will sign both of these documents right now. My professional license and my integrity are not for sale, Bradley, I replied, standing up. And Vance Holdings will not terminate its lease. Bradley's face contorted with rage. Fine. You want to play hardball? We'll play. 2 days later, Bradley called an emergency board meeting. When I walked into the boardroom, I saw the 5 members of the board of directors, along with Bradley and the company's general counsel. Lawrence Shaw was absent, hospitalized for his heart condition. Bradley stood up, holding a folder. Members of the board, Bradley announced, his voice filled with theatrical disappointment. After a thorough operational audit, we have determined that the role of senior commercial property manager is redundant. We are outsourcing the tower's management to an external agency to save operational costs. Effective immediately, Julian Vance is terminated for cause due to insubordination and failure to align with corporate restructuring. Julian, clean your desk and get out of my tower. The board members, who were mostly yes-men appointed by Bradley's family, nodded in agreement. The general counsel looked down at his papers, refusing to meet my eye. I did not argue. I did not point out my 15 years of flawless service or the millions of dollars I had saved the company. I simply looked at Bradley, nodded slowly, and said, "Understood." I walked out of the room, leaving behind the folder of termination papers. Bradley thought he had won. He thought he had cleared the final obstacle. He had no idea he had just pulled the pin on a financial grenade. After leaving the boardroom, I walked down to my office on the 15th floor. I packed my personal belongings, my technical manuals, and my personal files. I left my corporate-issued keys, my security badge, and my corporate cell phone on the desk. However, I did not hand over the security fobs or keys to Penthouse A and Penthouse B. As the managing member of Vance Holdings LLC, I was still the legal tenant of the top floor. Bradley could terminate my employment, but he could not touch my leasehold estate without a formal court order. I loaded my boxes into my car and drove straight to the offices of my commercial real estate attorney, Alan Finch. Alan Finch was a sharp, seasoned lawyer who had spent 30 years handling complex land use and contract disputes in our district. He had helped me draft the original lease agreement for Vance Holdings LLC back in 2014. I sat in his office, drinking black coffee while he reviewed my termination letter, the unsigned estoppel certificate, and the original recorded lease. Bradley has made a catastrophic mistake, Julian, Alan said, a slow smile spreading across his face. He was so eager to get rid of you that he completely ignored the covenants of your lease. Under Section 24, subsection D, they cannot transfer the title of the Shaw Tower to any third party without first offering Vance Holdings LLC the right to purchase the property on the exact same terms. They signed a purchase agreement with Crestwood Global Acquisitions for $45 million last week. That means the clock has already run out on their 24-hour window to notify you. What are our options, Alan? I asked. We file a lawsuit for breach of contract and specific performance, Alan explained, leaning back in his leather chair. Under the terms of your lease, since they failed to provide the required notice, You have the right to demand the court halt the sale to Crestwood and force Shaw Properties to sell the building to Vance Holdings LLC for the $45 million purchase price. To make sure they cannot slide this deal through, we will record a lis pendens against the property's title. A lis pendens is a Latin term meaning suit pending. In commercial real estate, it is the ultimate kill switch. It is a formal public notice filed with the County Recorder of Deeds, stating that the ownership and title of the real estate are subject to active litigation. Once a lis pendens is recorded, it appears on every title search. No title insurance company will ever issue a clean title policy on a property with an active lis pendens. Without title insurance, no commercial lender will fund a loan, and no sane buyer will close on the transaction. It effectively freezes the property in place, preventing any sale, refinancing, or transfer of ownership. Let's do it, I said, and prepare a formal notice of exercise. I want Vance Holdings LLC to officially exercise its right of first refusal to purchase the Shaw Tower for $45 million. Do you have $45 million, Julian? Alan asked, raising an eyebrow. I don't need to have the cash sitting in a bank account right now, I replied. By exercising the right, we establish our legal position. It forces them to either negotiate with us or face a multi-year litigation process that will destroy their deal with Crestwood. Under the terms of the rider, once they receive our notice of exercise, they are contractually obligated to enter into a 30-day negotiation period with us. If they refuse, they are in further breach. Within 24 hours, Alan Finch had drafted the complaint and filed the lawsuit in the county circuit court. By Thursday afternoon, the lis pendens was officially recorded with the county registrar of deeds, permanently attached to the legal description of the Shaw Tower. I then signed the formal notice of exercise of the right of first refusal. Allison sent the document via certified mail and courier to the headquarters of Shaw Properties Incorporated, addressed directly to Bradley Shaw and the General Counsel. We also sent a copy to Adrian Thorne at Crestwood Global Acquisitions, ensuring the buyer was fully aware that the building they were trying to purchase was now the subject of a major lawsuit. While the legal gears began to grind, I went back to my penthouse offices. I sat in my quiet suite, looking out over the city skyline. I had spent 15 years maintaining this building, ensuring every tenant was happy, every pipe was sealed, and every line of the budget was balanced. Bradley thought he could discard me like trash to line his own pockets. Now, the fate of his entire $45 million transaction rested in my hands. I poured myself a glass of scotch and waited for the panic to set in. The blowback was immediate and spectacular. On Monday morning, just 48 hours before the scheduled closing of the $45 million sale, the title insurance company conducted their final pre-closing search of the county records. The lis pendens flagged the property immediately. The title officer called the escrow company, who in turn called Adrian Thorne at Crestwood Global Acquisitions. The title company announced they could not issue a title policy due to the pending litigation over the right of first refusal. Adrian Thorne was absolutely furious. Under the terms of the purchase agreement, Shaw Properties was contractually required to deliver clean, marketable title at closing. If they failed to close due to a title defect within their control, it constituted a default. Crestwood's contract contained a liquidated damages clause, specifying a 25% penalty of the purchase price for default, which amounted to $11,250,000. Adrian immediately called Bradley Shaw, demanding answers and threatening to file a massive lawsuit by the end of the week. Bradley's world began to crumble. He called my personal phone repeatedly. My call log showed 72 missed calls from his office and cell phone over the next 12 hours. I did not answer a single one. I let every call go to voicemail. I wanted Bradley to feel the full weight of the silence, to realize that his corporate title and his expensive MBA meant absolutely nothing in the face of a legally binding contract. Frustrated by my silence, Bradley tried to retaliate. On Tuesday morning, when I arrived at the Shaw Tower lobby to go to my office, the security guard on duty stopped me. "I'm sorry, Julian," the guard said, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Bradley Shaw gave strict instructions to revoke your access. Your elevator keycard has been deactivated, and I'm not allowed to let you up to the penthouse." I did not raise my voice or argue with the guard. I simply pulled out my phone and dialed the local police department's non-emergency line. Within 15 minutes, 2 patrol officers arrived at the lobby. I presented them with a certified copy of my recorded 15-year lease agreement for Penthouse A and Penthouse B, along with my business registration for Vance Holdings LLC and proof of my monthly rent payments. Officers, I explained, I am the commercial tenant of the 22nd floor. The landlord has illegally deactivated my access fobs to prevent me from entering my leased premises. In this state, an unlawful lockout of a commercial tenant without a court-ordered eviction warrant is a misdemeanor violation of property law. The officers reviewed the documents, then turned to the security guard and the building supervisor who had come down to the lobby. "He's right," the lead officer told the supervisor. "You have a civil dispute, but you cannot lock a tenant out of their business without a sheriff's eviction notice. If you don't reactivate his fobs and let him up to his office right now, we will have to file a report for illegal lockout, and someone will be cited." The supervisor, terrified of getting arrested or sued, immediately took my card, ran it through the system, and reactivated my access. I thanked the officers, walked past the stunned security guards, and took the elevator up to the 22nd floor. An hour later, my office door slammed open. Bradley Shaw marched in, his face bright red, sweat dripping down his collar. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. He was breathing heavily, his hands shaking as he pointed a finger at me. "You parasite!" Bradley screamed, slamming his hands on my desk. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You are sabotaging a $45 million transaction. Crestwood is threatening to sue us for $11 million because of your pathetic little stunt. You're going to ruin this company." I sat back in my chair, looking up at him with absolute calm. "I'm not ruining the company, Bradley. You did that when you decided to ignore the legal contracts your father signed. You chose to fire me and tried to force me out of my office to get a transaction bonus." "I will give you $100,000, Bradley yelled, his voice cracking. $100,000 to sign the lease termination and withdraw the list pendants today. That's more than a year of your salary. Take it and get out." I smiled coldly. $100,000 doesn't even cover the interest on the damages you've caused. The list pendant stays, Bradley, and the lawsuit will proceed. If you want to talk, you can have your general counsel contact Alan Finch. Otherwise, please leave my office. You are trespassing on leased property." Bradley stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He realized for the first time in his life that his money and his family name couldn't save him from his own incompetence. He turned and stumbled out of my office. The battle had been won now. It was time for the final payoff. By Wednesday morning, the board of directors of Shaw Properties Incorporated was in a state of absolute panic. Lawrence Shaw, still weak but recovering, discharged himself from the hospital against his doctor's advice to handle the emergency. The threat of a $12 million default lawsuit from Crestwood Global Acquisitions, combined with the complete freezing of their main asset, had pushed the company to the brink of bankruptcy. Lawrence knew that the building's sale was the only thing keeping the company solvent after several bad investments Bradley had made in the suburbs. Lawrence called me directly. His voice was tired and lacked the booming authority he once had, but he was polite. "Julian, please, we need to talk. I know Bradley acted like a fool, and I want to make this right. Come to the boardroom tomorrow. Let's sit down like gentlemen." I agreed, but only on the condition that my attorney, Alan Finch, would accompany me, and that Bradley Shaw would not be allowed in the room. Lawrence accepted the terms immediately. On Thursday morning, Alan and I walked into the 20th floor boardroom. Lawrence sat at the head of the table, looking pale and frail. Beside him were the general counsel and the board members. Bradley was nowhere to be seen. "Julian," Lawrence began, clearing his throat, "I want to apologize for how you were treated. You served this company faithfully for 15 years and you managed the Shaw Tower flawlessly. Bradley's actions were unacceptable. He did not understand the agreements we made, and he did not respect the legacy of this building. But we need this sale to go through. Crestwood will sue us into oblivion if we don't close. What will it take for you to release the right of first refusal and withdraw the list pendants? Alan Finch slid a prepared settlement agreement across the table. The terms are non-negotiable, Lawrence, Alan stated. First, Shaw Properties will pay Vance Holdings LLC a lease buyout fee of $12 million. This represents the present value of the remaining lease term, the relocation costs, the lost business revenue, and the penalty clause specified in Section 24 of the lease rider. Lawrence winced at the number, but he did not interrupt. Second, Alan continued, Shaw Properties will pay Julian Vance $150,000 in outstanding performance bonuses and contract severance that were withheld during his wrongful termination. Third, Bradley Shaw must be permanently stripped of all operational authority, removed from his position as Vice President of Operations, and barred from any executive role in Shaw Properties. If these terms are accepted, Vance Holdings will withdraw the Liz Pendens and sign a waiver of the right of first refusal, allowing the sale to Crestwood to close. Lawrence looked at the board members. The general counsel whispered in his ear, pointing out that paying $12 million now was far better than losing a $45 million sale and paying $11,250,000 in court damages to Crestwood, plus millions more in legal fees. Lawrence sighed, picked up his pen, and looked at me. You always were a sharp manager, Julian. I just wish my son had inherited a fraction of your business sense. Lawrence signed the settlement agreement. The board members voted unanimously to ratify the decision. Within 24 hours, the escrow company wired $12,150,000 into the bank account of Vance Holdings, LLC. Alan Finch filed the motion to withdraw the Liz Pendens, and the title company immediately issued the clean title policy to Crestwood Global Acquisitions. The $45 million transaction officially closed on Friday afternoon. Bradley Shaw's corporate career was over. He was demoted to a low-level administrative position at a suburban strip mall owned by the company, stripped of his company car, his stock options, and his executive salary. The board of directors eventually filed a shareholder lawsuit against him for gross negligence, seeking to claw back his past bonuses due to the financial damage he had caused. I used my massive payout to purchase a beautiful, historic 3-story commercial brick building located just 4 blocks down the street for $5 million. The building had been constructed in the early 20th century, featuring gorgeous exposed brick walls, heavy timber beams, and large arched windows that let in floods of natural light. I spent another $1 million fully renovating the entire structure, installing energy-efficient dual-pane windows, a modern fiber optic network infrastructure, and a state-of-the-art climate control system to ensure low operating costs. I converted the upper floors into high-end loft offices tailored specifically for creative agencies and fast-growing technology startups, while leasing the ground floor to a popular artisanal coffee shop and an upscale local organic market. Within 6 months, the building was fully leased at premium rates, generating a steady stream of passive rental income that exceeded $40,000 a month. I no longer manage other people's properties. I am now a major independent commercial landlord in my own right, operating Vance Holdings LLC from the top floor of my own building. Sometimes, I stand by the window looking down the street at the Shaw Tower. I smile, remembering how a greedy successor tried to take everything from me, only to hand me the keys to my own empire.